The unmistakable sound of Silver, the Lone Ranger's trusty horse, galloping across living rooms from coast to coast started it all. Every week, fans applauded for the masked rider in white headgear and the stoic Native American companion in dress buckskins as they fought crime and won. But beneath the tall feather and steady drawl was a man whose life story was much more interesting and much darker than anything that could be written on TV. He was born Harold J. Smith and grew up on Canada's Six Nations Reserve as a Mohawk. His stage name was J. Silverheels. He learnt early on that identity could be both a shield and a prison, and that renown could be granted and taken away in the same word. He was the most renowned Native American on American TV as Tonto. As J. Silverheels, he struggled with the weight of preconceptions, his own issues, and a strong desire to leave behind a legacy of dignity. This is the story of a guy who rode with a legend yet lived in the dark shadow of the mask. Harold's adventure began beside the Grand River, where his mother, Eddie Smith, would often tell Mohawk stories while they were picking crops. In old pictures, you can see a boy with brilliant eyes wearing jeans that had been passed down to him. The frost from the first frost of fall is on his cheeks. He was great in lacrosse and got the nickname Silverheels because he was so fast on the field. But the promise of local heroics quickly ran into the harsh reality of life outside the reserve: poverty that never ends, few job opportunities, and the stress of living in a bicultural home. His father worked on the railroad and was on leave, so he only came home now and again. This left Eddie to raise Harold and his siblings by herself. When Harold's family moved to southern Ontario for school, he faced both opportunity and prejudice. Professional sports recruiters saw his skill, but his classmates made fun of his native name. By the time he was 16, he had changed his name from Harold Smith to J. Silverheels. This new name made him seem more sophisticated, but it also hid his background. An accidental meeting at a summer fair changed the course of his life. A Hollywood talent scout saw Jay's dominating presence and athletic grace in an exhibition lacrosse match and offered him a screen test. Hollywood wanted its westerns to be real, with performers of different races who could make Native American characters seem more real. That day, the silver heels on his sneakers made him feel lucky. He flew to Los Angeles and tried out for little parts, often as Indian extras in dusty saloons or stoic chiefs watching white people come in. He had gotten a speaking part in a B-Western by 1940. Studio publicity called him the Real Deal, a real Indian working with bigger stars. His tribal affiliation was turned into a label in carefully worded press releases: J. Silverheels of the Mohawk tribe. This name both opened doors and slammed them shut. He was in high demand for scenes that showed how real people acted, but he was stuck in supporting roles that kept him from being himself, like the noble barbarian, the quiet sidekick, or the ceremonial dancer. If being real meant being limited, Silverheels would discover how to turn that limit into an advantage. His determination grew stronger after World War II. He moved to New York, studied acting at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and got radio jobs that took advantage of his deep voice. By 1949, he had the honor of playing in about 20 movies under several names, such as Harold Smith in one, Silverheels in another, and occasionally even a Native American character that didn't fit at all. But Hollywood's camera couldn't focus on Jay the man, it only saw Tonto the caricature. He wanted a persona with more depth than just a feathered headpiece and buckskin leggings. He was both excited and scared when he got the call in 1949 to audition for a new TV show. From 1949 to 1957, the Lone Ranger would ride, and playing Tonto would be the most important part in his career. His first line on camera, "Koemo Sabi," would become as well known as community events and theme songs. But the triumph of visibility hid the sorrow of erasure. His own voice was drowned out by catchphrases, his face was locked in the flicker of black and white screens, and his identity was often buried behind the mask of Tonto. Even with the sacrifices, Jay saw a chance. Tonto's alliance with the Lone Ranger was a rare example of Native and white heroes being equal. This was a strange message in post-war America. He gradually but forcefully fought for episodes that gave Tonto power, employing Native wisdom to solve problems, showing ceremonies instead of caricatures, and even putting Tonto in the foreground instead of the background. But ratings executives didn't like anything that was too complicated. When Jay suggested a two-part feature about the problems faced by displaced tribes, sponsors were worried about getting into trouble. Instead, Tonto stayed the loyal shadow, the man whose wisdom could only be heard when the masked hero was behind him. These sacrifices hurt Jay's spirit, even though they made his face famous. He fixed this identity dilemma by giving money and mentoring others when the cameras weren't rolling. He went back to Six Nations every year to pay for lacrosse programs and build community centers. He taught students in schools about keeping Mohawk customs alive and wrote writings under his birth name about the revival of culture. He became a go-to expert on Native authenticity in Hollywood, teaching other actors about language and rights. But every red feather on a robe and every scene shot in a teepee on a backlit reminded him that progress was slow. Every time the Lone Ranger's contract was renewed, there was a brief chance to renegotiate his worth, but the basic arithmetic stayed the same. Black and white TV needed color-coded simplicity more than it needed meaningful character arcs. By the end of the 1950s, Jay Silverheels was at a crossroads. The show was about to be cancelled, and he was worried about being typecast for the rest of his life. Would he just be able to play one type of character? Could Harold J. Smith, the child who outran defenders on a lacrosse field, outrun what people thought he should do? In the next part, we'll talk about the hidden expenses of celebrity, the fights he had to get his rights and royalties, and the facts that came out when the camera's glare finally vanished. After the cameras stopped rolling on the Lone Ranger in 1957, Jay Silverheels was both free and trapped by his other persona. Fans loved Tonto's calm wisdom and tenacious loyalty, but Jay had a hard time getting credit and making ends meet. Most reruns didn't pay him anything because there were no guarantees of residual payments back then. In the 1950s, contracts paid a flat fee for each episode, which was much less than what studios made via syndication. Clayton Moore made money off of The Masked Marvel for a long time, but Jay had a hard time getting even a little part of the income. He asked celebrity agencies, agents, and studio heads to look at his contract, but they all said no in a rude way or gave him polite platitudes. After sending dozens of emails, going to board meetings, and negotiating, he went to the Screen Actors Guild. He wrote down earnings, episode airings, and rerun broadcasts for each chapter, building a case for an unusual claim. He fought against big studios in court, aiming to get justice for himself and set a good example for all other performers who support him. But getting paid was just one battle. Jay wanted to show more respect for Native performers who had been typecast as extras with no names. He suggested forming a Native Actors Guild, a group that would preserve cultural integrity and artistic rights. At the early 1960s, he held meetings at Hollywood backlots and rented halls in Burbank. Indigenous artists went to the events and told stories about broken promises, ceremonial attire that was never delivered, and tribe names that were mispronounced on TV. These admissions made him even more passionate. He wrote a charter that said cultural consultants should get credit on screen, actors should be paid fairly for their speaking roles, and tribal elders should work with the actors to make sure the portrayals are real. Even though the guild effort fell short because of money and logistical problems, Jay's leadership laid the groundwork for future activism. His stance as an elder statesman resonated with activists and was part of the larger civil rights movement that was happening across the country. But when he was alone, Jay's strength was challenged by being alone and doubting himself. When the next decade brought westerns without Tonto, he had to wait years for a good role. Producers gave him little roles. Casting directors offered roles in movies that had nothing to do with indigenous stories. At fairs and retail malls, people would come up to them and ask for autographs while wearing feathered hats, and fans would beg for posed photos. But these appearances cost them money and made them emotionally tired. When a Texas county fair paid him just enough to pay his travel costs, Jay started to wonder if his whole career had been a mistake. Tonto's stoic heroism and Jay's growing sadness were so different that he had a hard time bridging the gap between them. Jay found comfort and rhythm in his ancestors' music again when he was home on the Six Nations Reserve. He found peace on lacrosse fields, where he taught young players how to play traditional games. He inhaled in fresh air under the maple trees and listened to stories that had been told for generations. He spoke stories about Hollywood's illusions in local halls and advised young people to get an education. He also looked to elders and medicine men for spiritual support. Hollywood took advantage of him, but his community took care of him. This combination of exploitation and welcome paralleled Jay's own life, a guy buffeted by two worlds yet trying to blend them into a balanced identity. Jay's life changed when he met actress and activist Buffy St. Marie on the shooting of a documentary on Native American musicians. Buffy asked him to join a new campaign to protect culture. Jay was inspired by her mix of art and politics, so he started making music and writing creative tunes that mixed banjo strings with traditional flutes. He made music at studios in Toronto and Los Angeles and put out an album under his real name, Harold Smith. Even though mainstream charts didn't give him much credit, Indigenous radio stations loved his work. He sang in powwows and community events to get his ethnic voice back. These musical adventures brought him back to life and helped him meet more Indigenous musicians and non-native allies. As the American Indian movement and rallies for Indigenous rights grew stronger in the early 1970s, Jay Silverheels found his last calling. He became a spokesperson to help in talks about making movies on tribal land. When Hollywood thought about filming on Cherokee or Navajo Nation land, they had to talk to Jay first. Because he had been fighting for years, he could have cultural advisors, business partnerships, and the right credits. He was no longer just Tonto, he was a middleman between glam and tradition. Harold J. Smith came out from behind the mask as a protector of identity and a guardian of images that would change how people saw things. The new royalties he battled for added to his TV income, finally giving him financial stability. He carried on Tonto's heritage and fought for real native representation with all his heart. Jay Silverheels' career had a second resurgence in the mid-1970s, when he played a key role in negotiating on behalf of Native communities. Producers knew that his profound understanding of Native American cultures and his stature as a Hollywood celebrity made him the best person to be an advisor. He worked on big Western movies that wanted to be real, including The Outlaw Trail. He made sure that the costumes, dialect coaching, and script changes were all true to real tribal traditions. He got credit on film for more than just acting, sometimes he was designated as a cultural consultant. The cast and crew recognized his authority, and the stunt writers asked him for advice on how to put on appropriate tack and war paint. While filming on the Navajo Nation, he made sure that extras were paid fairly and insisted on engaging Indigenous craftspeople to make ceremonial artifacts. This gave communities that Hollywood had long ignored new economic prospects. At the same time, Silverheels took on minor roles on screen that let him show off his variety beyond stoicism. He was a guest star on crime shows like Mannix and Ironside, where he played sheriffs and investigators with complicated morals that were nothing like the typical buckskin characters. In the cult horror movie Blood Quantum, he played a shaman who was fighting supernatural forces. Critics appreciated the part for its dignity and weight. Even though they weren't always credited, these appearances reminded people that Harold J. Smith was a skilled actor who could play both sympathetic and threatening roles. His deep voice gave him credibility when he told Algonquin mythology in documentary films. He recorded traditional stories in the first person, preserving oral traditions for future generations. Jay's personal experience off camera was similar to that of many servicemen from his time. He married ballerina June White in 1965 after meeting her at a charity banquet. Their marriage offered him love and security. June was there for him when he had to deal with his own demons, like his problems with alcohol that started when he was alone on the road between reservations and Hollywood sets. He joined Alcoholics Anonymous in the early 1970s and said that the group helped him find a new sense of purpose. He often spoke at AA meetings, using the same moral clarity that Tonto showed on screen to guide new members through humility and fraternity. June and his two kids, Leslie and Joshua, became the main characters in his story. They gave Jay the unconditional support he had been talking about for a long time but had trouble embracing himself. In 1973, the National Congress of American Indians gave Silverheels the Eagle Feather Award for his lifetime work to improve realistic depictions and community care. The ceremony took place in Washington, D.C., and tribal leaders from all around North America were there. Jay wore a suit and a turquoise bolo tie to show that he was proud of both his Hollywood image and his Mohawk background. He said in his acceptance speech that playing Tonto had been both a gift and a responsibility, but that his biggest success was getting mainstream media to recognize Native customs. He dedicated the honor to the elders who taught him the legends of his people and said that his mother's memory was his greatest source of inspiration. He finally released his long-delayed autobiography, Writing with Silverheels, that same year. Linda Adams, a journalist, helped him write it. The book was a mix of personal stories and bigger thoughts about how Hollywood has changed and how Indigenous people have fought for their rights. Readers learned about stories that had been kept secret before, the tense negotiations in the studio that made Jay choose between his paycheck and his principles, the nights he paced the lot while rehearsing lines for roles that made fun of his heritage, and the thrill he felt on lacrosse fields where he was just Jay instead of Tonto. The book was praised by critics as a major addition to Native American writing, and it was used in college classes on media studies, identity, and social justice. Jay became more and more interested in being a mentor in his last years. He conducted acting classes at the American Indian Performing Arts Center in Los Angeles, where he helped people who wanted to be actors with scene work and being true to their culture. He told his students to develop their own sequences instead of using Hollywood's cliches. This helped fresh voices emerge in animation scripts and independent films. Many of his students went on to become famous actors, and they all regard Jay's stress on personal sincerity as a major influence. Jay Silverheels died of a heart attack at his home in Los Angeles on March 5, 1980, at the age of 59. News reports talked about the end of an era and remembered Tonto's famous sayings and that quiet feathered hat. But others who knew Harold J. Smith remembered a life that was much more full of perseverance, activism, and deep love for his neighborhood. In his honor, his family set up the Silverheels Memorial Scholarship, which gives money each year to Native American students who want to work in the arts, media, or cultural studies. The fund made sure that his legacy would live on in young artists who would take on the combined burden of creativity and conscience. In 1987, the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce eventually gave Jay Silverheels a star for his work on TV. His name is now next to the Lone Ranger's masked benefactor. The plaque says, Jay Silverheels, actor, advocate, Mohawk warrior. Every year on the anniversary, fans and tribal leaders leave cedar boughs and moccasins on the sidewalk to show respect for both his on-screen heroism and his off-screen battles. His influence can still be seen in the work of actors like Wes Studi, Graham Greene, and Irene Bedard, who all want authenticity, credit, and creative freedom in films that tell Indigenous stories. Jay Silverheels' truth shines brighter than any highlight reel on TV, thanks to scholarship winners, festival winners, and retellings of his memoir. In the next section, we'll look at the modern debates about representation that his life sparked and how his groundbreaking work set the stage for today's discussions about cultural ownership and media responsibility. From the red earth of the Six Nations and the dusty backlots of Hollywood to the streaming platforms of today, Jay Silverheels' legacy is felt in every debate about how Indigenous people are shown on screen. Since he rode with the Lone Ranger, people have become more aware of the subtleties of cultural representation and the power dynamics that go into casting judgments. It is no longer okay for non-native actors to wear headdresses or copy languages for the sake of entertainment. Instead, both producers and consumers know that authenticity comes from real-life experiences, and that Indigenous voices should have both creative freedom and recognition when it is due. Today's arguments are similar to the ones Jay fought. When a big studio hired a non-Indigenous star to play an Ojibwe elder in a big movie, people on social media started protesting with the hashtag #NotYourMascot. Tribal councils spoke out against the decision and called for community leaders to be consulted. Reservation Dogs in Rutherford Falls are two of the original programs that streaming platforms have asked Indigenous showrunners to make. In these shows, casting is by Native actors, writing rooms are managed by Native actors, and cultural details come up naturally. These breakthroughs have their philosophical foundations in Jay's emphasis on having experts on set, giving correct credits, and making economic connections with tribal territories. His talks from the 1960s can still be heard in today's inclusion riders and equity mandates, which are contract stipulations that mandate a certain amount of underrepresented talent both on and off camera. Jay's work has also led film schools and academies to change their curricula. Writing with Silverheels is now required reading for media ethics classes, along with collections of Indigenous cinema philosophy. University panels analyze his roles and activity, contrasting early westerns, where Tonto's wisdom complemented the Lone Ranger's heroism, with modern storylines that highlight Native characters. Some scholars think Tonto was a step forward in 1949, while others think it was a compromise that put off more complicated portrayals for decades. They say that Jay broke down barriers, but he also had to work within the limited responsibilities he was given. This is a lesson that urges creators to push for systemic change instead of just accepting the way things are. Unions have written down protections in the business world that were inspired by Jay's work with the Screen Actors Guild. The new Cultural Equity Agreement from SAG-AFTRA says that production companies must set aside money for cultural advisors and pay residuals on all episodes with Indigenous cast members. When Netflix released its rendition of a best-selling novel set on Navajo soil, it paid Mohawk professors to help with both language and ceremonial, much like it did with senior producers. These protocols mark a change in how things are done since Jay's status as a real Indian was acknowledged in press kits but not at contract tables. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences also changed its rules for how to represent people. The Academy's 2020 rules required diversity targets for Best Picture eligibility after years of being criticized under the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite. To show that Indigenous people are represented, producers need to show that they are really including Native people behind the camera, like story editors, cinematographers, or composers. Jay never got his own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame until after he died, but today's rules make sure that new Indigenous filmmakers can compete on an equal playing field, recognizing the path he built. People who watch movies have also gotten smarter. Indigenous filmmakers' documentaries follow the family trees of movie cliches, connecting Tonto's silent stoicism to early film motifs that made detrimental caricatures more common. These Are My People, 2021, and We Are the People, 2023, are shown in public with spoken word performances that make people think about the difference between admiration and appropriation. There are vintage clips of Jay Silverheels teaching actors how to make correct moccasin seams, along with current reenactments that show how he did it exactly. Film students and festivalgoers can witness how one man's lifetime of campaigning set the standard for a new generation through these comparisons. Even ads for businesses have changed. Companies that used to use fake native images now work with real Indigenous artists on real advertisements. Bulletproof coffee ads show native ranchers talking about how they grow beans on their property. Fashion businesses hire Indigenous craftsmen to make beaded patterns for them, and they pay them fairly. Jay couldn't have known about these changes in global supply networks and consumer awareness, but his work for most of his life showed that those who experience cultural stories must tell them. But there are still problems. Sometimes, reality shows and computer games go back to old stereotypes, like calling in native consultants at the last minute or paying them small amounts of money without giving them any real input. When this happens, Indigenous proponents point to Jay Silverheels as an example. He had high standards for screenplay correctness, wouldn't take payoffs instead of creative respect, and wanted Indigenous people to be involved in every step of production. His fights remind people who are new to the scene that representation without power is just decoration. As streaming platforms hire more Indigenous-led shows, they give Jay credit as an unofficial founding supporter of this creative revolution. His story teaches us that integrity leads to long-lasting success in a world where material is always changing. His rise from being a sideline sidekick to a cultural broker shows how to do it: demand credit and fair compensation, make friends with people from different backgrounds, and use cultural understanding in every artistic choice. These ideas drive modern showrunners who now put native characters at the center of the story, making sure their stories come out with the depth and respect that Jay wanted. In short, Jay Silverheels was brave enough to pave the way for the modern entertainment industry, which now has diversity mandates, inclusion riders, and consulting fees that are hard to pay. His life narrative caused a huge change in how we think about realism on television, from the red clay fields of Six Nations to the guarded sets of Hollywood. And as people around the world watch fresh Indigenous content, they see the living legacy of a man who didn't want to be known solely as Tonto. In the next piece, we'll switch from prominence to pressure. We'll look at the personal costs of breaking down barriers and how Jay's path is a reflection of the bigger fight for cultural reclamation in the modern world. Jay Silverheels' efforts opened doors for many Indigenous artists, but the human cost of his activism was largely hidden. He had to represent an entire culture every time he stepped onto a set for a long period in the 1980s. People who liked the Lone Ranger cheered for Tonto's silent loyalty, but they didn't often stop to think about how Harold J. Smith felt when the cameras stopped rolling. The script pages were done, but his work as a cultural watchdog went on. He had to negotiate reasonable pay, give advice to new actors, and challenge directors who were wrong. He had trouble sleeping since he knew that one mistake may put him back years of progress. Every casting call made him think the same thing: could he trust Hollywood to tell his people's tales, or would he have to defend their dignity again? Jay had reservations that were identical to the ones he had as a youth on the Six Nations Reserve, but he kept them to himself. He wondered if the compromises he had made over the years had really made a difference or if they had just covered up stereotypes with better paint. When he got the Eagle Feather Award in 1973, he felt both proud and uneasy. He worried if such awards would be enough to change long-standing biases in the business. He spent his nights reading screenplays provided to him by producers who wanted to make movies. The stories said they would give nuanced portrayals, but they still turned indigenous characters as wise men or supernatural guides. If he turned down these offers, he would be putting his money at danger, especially since his health was getting worse. If he accepted them, he would be going against the values he had battled so hard to create. The stress affected his family at home. Jay was often in his study, where a desk lamp lit the room, going over contracts and writing notes in the margins of screenplays. In the kitchen, they went from talking about family issues to negotiating about screens. As he pushed for the right tribe names in dialogue or the right credit lines in end titles, his kids Leslie and Joshua learned to peep covertly. They knew that Jay occasionally had to put bigger cultural issues ahead of bedtime stories or weekend adventures because he loved them. June's unwavering support kept him from breaking down under the weight of expectations, but even she said she felt like she was in his shadow as a loving father and a lone warrior for representation. It was hard on her mental health to be the first or only Indigenous counsel on big productions. Jay regularly found himself to be the only Native person among a crowd of extras and crew members when he was filming on location. He ate by himself in tents set up by caterers and answered questions about Tonto's past or the stories about the Lone Ranger. Reporters wanted short quotes on his life on Six Nations, but publicists wanted to guide talks toward happy stories. People rarely talked about the structural problems he wanted to talk about, such land rights, language preservation, and economic equality. Jay risked losing future consulting work and making producers angry when he spoke out. Sometimes it felt safer to keep quiet, but it also felt like he was betraying his people. His health problems made his mental problems worse. He finally paid for all the late nights and missed meals. He had a small heart attack in 1978, which made him rethink what was important to him. Doctors told them to relax, while community leaders told them to stay alert. Jay found a delicate balance by cutting back on travel while focusing more on writing and mentoring. His autobiography, Writing with Silverheels, let him tell the truth about things he had kept to himself for a long time. The book's release brought both relief and new worry. Would Hollywood ignore his criticisms as old complaints, or would they use them to bring about real change? The next generation of performers and filmmakers who would read his words and build on what he had done would be the answer. Jay found comfort in minor wins as he got closer to the end of his life. He was proud to see Indigenous-led films win accolades at festivals, Native characters get equal prominence on TV shows, and language revitalization projects thrive on reserves and in cities. He mentored up-and-coming stars who then mentored others, creating a chain of cultural reclamation. He died in 1980, but his ideas live on in the guiding principles that are now written down in inclusion riders and ethical consulting agreements. Jay's spirit was there every time a writer used a Cherokee phrase or a director cast a Haida elder to teach carving techniques. It was a reminder of how one man's determination changed an industry. The fight to reclaim culture goes on, thanks to the work Jay did. Indigenous artists, authors, filmmakers, and scholars now use what he taught them about negotiation, self-advocacy, and presenting stories that are centered on the community. They face new problems, like digital platforms that make both representation and appropriation more common, worldwide streaming audiences that want realness, and the constant struggle between making money and staying true to their culture. Jay's example is a guiding light through it all. Stay true to your principles, teach with kindness but firmness, and turn down positions that make you feel less proud of your history. We can see his mark all over the modern world, in the syllabi of film schools, behind the scenes of big movies, and on the walls of studios that now show Indigenous art next to iconic Hollywood posters. His long, hard-fought path from Tonto's mute stoicism to a respected cultural broker shows that breaking down boundaries requires personal sacrifice, and the rewards go far beyond personal recognition. As we get ready to end Jay Silverheels' story, we'll look at how his work has affected individual artists, community projects, and the changing stories that continue to shape how we think about identity, representation, and creative freedom. From the red clay lacrosse fields of Six Nations to the streaming services where Indigenous creators now have global audiences, Jay Silverheels' influence is still clear. He wasn't just Tonto's sidekick, he was a force for cultural reclamation that still affects movie sets, classrooms, and community events today. Think about the actors whose careers Jay's example opened up. Wes Studi, whose stunning performances in Dances with Wolves and Avatar garnered him an Academy Award nomination, often says that Jay's emphasis on proper attribution was what got him interested in activism. Graham Greene, the first Native American to be nominated for an Oscar, says that Silverheels' memoir Writing with Silverheels taught him that human stories can go beyond stereotypes. Irene Bedard, who voiced Disney's Pocahontas, found the strength in Jay's story to ask for creative control and screenplay approval. Each of these artists sits on the foundation Jay created, which reminds us that the line of representation comes from those who fight for fairness first. Jay's impact goes beyond famous performers, it also helps community projects that help the next generation grow. The American Indian Performing Arts Center in Los Angeles gives out Silverheels scholarships each year to up-and-coming filmmakers. These scholarships give them the money they need to write scripts that focus on Native American culture. The Harold Smith Cultural Institute on the Six Nations Reserve keeps the Mohawk language alive through digital archives and hands-on courses led by Jay's own elder mentors. Jay's Silverheels Fellowships are offered at film schools in New York and Toronto. They match Indigenous students with professional mentors on big movies. These programs are in line with Jay's two goals: to teach craft and to make sure that cultural authenticity is present at every level of creation. When students finish these programs, they have not only learned technical skills but also Jay's idea of stewardship, which means that they have a responsibility to their community that makes their own success a group success. In the larger media world, Jay's early fights are still relevant to today's discussions about who owns stories and how to work together ethically. Streaming companies increasingly hire native showrunners and writers early on in the process. This is a direct response to Silverheels' insistence in the 1960s that cultural consultation take place before principal photography began. When Reservation Dogs first aired on Hulu, the writer's room was full of Cherokee voices. This was in line with Jay's belief that stories based on real-life experiences are more powerful than those told from the point of view of outsiders. In the same way, the Academy's inclusion rules, which require proof of Indigenous participation in writing teams and production departments, go back to the ideas Jay talked about on industry forums decades ago. These new rules are proof of his vision, that fair representation needs real change, not just showy gestures. Jay's influence can also be seen in school courses. Media ethics classes typically use case studies to compare how Tonto was shown in 1950s westerns to how characters are shown in modern shows like Rutherford Falls. Students look at how Jay gained credit for cultural consulting and then talk about the moral issues that come up when advisors don't get credit in today's big movies. Scholars view his rise from uncredited bit roles to named cultural consultant as a major change, showing how working for change from within a system can work. In seminars focused on decolonizing media, Jay's autobiography is essential reading, not only for its historical significance but also for its framework on self-advocacy and creative autonomy. Graduates of these programs are ready to question the rules of production and take control of the story in the same manner that Jay did when she was in the spotlight in Hollywood. The changes in how Jay is portrayed on TV show how much of an impact he had. Tonto's lines in the 1960s were mostly catchphrases and one-syllable words. Today, series like Ghosts, Indigenous and Prey reveal nuanced characters whose cultural customs are an important part of the story, not just included as exotic decoration. Thanks to the rules Jay helped set up for on-set experts to check scripts, casting directors now often work with tribal councils to make sure that actors speak real language, such Mohawk greetings or Lakota prayers. Video games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla use Inuktitut voiceovers recorded by Inuit actors. This is a concept that Jay started, to respect and celebrate cultural dialects and pay speakers professional salaries. The attention to detail and authenticity is in line with Silverheels' work throughout his life. Even people who only watch TV and movies for fun can benefit from Jay's work. More and more often, when someone clicks play on a new Western or dystopian show, they will see Indigenous folks that are central to the story instead of just being in the background. They learn the correct names of tribes and witness traditional clothing made by Native American artists. These on-screen realities help people feel more empathy for others, which was Jay's original hope, that respect for Indigenous cultures would spread from movies to everyday life. Every time a viewer learns about a new tribe or sees a cultural consultant credit in the end credits, his idea of media as a bridge between worlds lives on. As entertainment becomes more global, Jay Silverheels' narrative shows that honesty and ethics can work on any continent or platform. His rise from being a sideline sidekick to a respected cultural strategist shows designers how to deal with comparable problems today, whether they be women, LGBTQ people, ethnic minorities, or other historically marginalized groups. They honor the trailblazer who first took that stance in Hollywood's golden period by asking for credit, fair pay, and creative control. As we think about Jay's lasting achievements, we realize that the ultimate measure of an icon is not how long they were on screen but how much they changed things behind the scenes. The things that Jay Silverheels battled to build, such scholarships and institutes, diversity standards, and storytelling breakthroughs, still help generations of storytellers. Every time a production credits a cultural consultant, every time a school adds his memoir to its syllabus, and every time a student gets a Silverheels scholarship, Jay's spirit rides with them. This reminds us that the road to justice and representation is paved by those who dare to challenge the status quo, feather plume and all.